Hello and welcome to the corner of Morris and Queen. My name is Chris Green. I run Atlantic News, and today we're going to talk about Remembrance Day. We're recording this on Friday, November 8th, and I'm very pleased to have Mr. William Breckenridge here, one of our customers involved in many local affairs, and we're going to talk about Remembrance Day. Just a little introduction. Remembrance Day originally came from Armistice Day, the Armistice being the end of World War I, officially the 11th hour on the 11th day of the 11th month. From what I understand in Canada, initially Armistice Day was celebrated on another day in November, and then between 1921 and 1931, it was Armistice Day as well as a day of Thanksgiving. And then in 1931, officially the federal government decreed that Armistice Day would become Remembrance Day. So a little bit of the background of that day here in Canada. William Breckenridge, thank you for coming and welcome.
Hi, thank you, Chris. It's good to be here. And I think that it's very poignant that we cover the topic of Remembrance Day in the climate that we're globally in right now and of volatility. And we cannot forget what has gone on in the past because we don't want to repeat that. Trust me on that.
Yes, absolutely. I agree. It seems that democracy is on its heels. Some of the major countries, including one very close to us in the South, seem to be supporting more authoritarian instincts. So very important to remember why we do this. So why don't you get us started here and add to my little introduction. Why Remembrance Day?
I think it's the most poignant story that I can come up with was last year, this time a year ago actually, I went to France, and I went to Vimy Ridge, and I went to the fields where my great-grandfather, Hugh Breckenridge, regimental sergeant major, fought in the trenches in 1918. He won the Silver Distinguished Conduct Medal, territorial medals for fighting in the Middle East, and at Gallipoli. Saw some of the worst episodes of human warfare that could ever be thought, and survived it all. Of 600 men who left Scotland in 1915, where he was born and raised in Greenock, he was one of less than 30 that came back.
Wow. So your grandfather, you said, also saw duty at the Battle of Gallipoli.
At Gallipoli, and just outside of Akibaba, which was a battle that happened along the peninsula with the Ottomans, and it was under Winston Churchill and the British Admiralty, thinking it was a good idea to try to take this to get control of the Black Sea and the Bosphorus, and get control of Constantinople, Istanbul at the time.
Right.
And
didn't turn out the way that the British and Mr. Churchill thought. I spent 8 years in Turkey and visited Gallipoli. It's in an area they call Çanakkale, and very amazing place. And as you might know, the Turks have a huge statue that commemorates all of the Kiwis and Aussies that died in battle there, and the New Zealand and Australia and Turkey really come together on this issue. Quite an amazing place.
And actually, to that point, my grandfather's regiment, the Argyll Southerners, which are the same that were based here in Halifax, but this was the original Scottish contingent of it. They were sent over there as young men, 18, 19 years old, maybe even younger, and they were in the head trenches in front of the Aussies. And I got a book from the museum there in Scotland that takes care of all of that, kind of remembrance of that time and of those issues. If you go to Greenock, Scotland, you will see streets named after Gallipoli Street and things like that, because they were actually in heavier fighting than the Aussies were.
Right.
And it's just very poignant to think that there was somewhere around an 80% casualty rate for the British troops at that point, and just the wastefulness of war. And why should we remember? Well, just look back, and like I say, going to Vimy Ridge, standing there in the pouring rain by myself. It was this time of year, so there's no tourists around, and it was just I and my brother, and he was on the other side of the monument, and I was on one side, and you just sit there in solitude with the rain coming down, and you can almost hear the cries of the men. And the field itself, there's spots where they still didn't demine it or take the ammunitions out, so they have warning signs up, not to step around there. You stay on the cemented pathway, you don't go off of wandering. And that brings that home. We don't have that here in Nova Scotia as far as like a battlefield.
Yeah,
and
luckily
we do have battlefields, but it's very different. They're not filled with ammunition.
Yes, that's right.
So it's a very different kind of mindset and a different kind of level of respect when you go to a place like that. And just a little further south of Vimy is what's called the Loch Nagar crater. And if you look that up, it was the first shot fired to the Battle of the Somme, which people say was the worst battle in history. It's just, as far as casualties, brutal, just so senseless.
So, William, you are from here. You grew up here. The little bit I know about you, when I stand outside of the store, across the street is a former Greek church that I think your parents were married in.
That's right.
And I think, am I right? Catty corner from here, it's a parking lot now. It used to be a hospital. Someone in your family was born in that hospital, I believe.
Well, it could have probably my aunt. Probably would have been. And the most would have been in the Grace. But my mom worked in that hospital. For many, many years.
So did you, growing up? I imagine you heard many stories about the war. You were too young to know your grandfather, I imagine. But
my great grandfather,
your great grandfather,
because he died at 40 after the war of lung failure and bronchitis, and that damaged his lungs. And further researching and finding, he had been gassed in France during those last moments of the war.
And we know World War I is when sides started experimenting with these different gases, mustard gas in particular.
Yes, it was horrific, absolutely horrific what was going on, and I think some of the more recent war movies really illustrate that.
Right.
And we really need to remember as a society not to go there, because humanity can go pretty low when that happens, and we owe so much to those men and women who serve then and now, because there's always people out there who want more power than they can handle or understand, and from that causes great grief and destruction as well.
Right.
And so we need to respect that at all times. And growing up, both sides of my family were always armed service people who served. On my mom's side, her uncle was commander-in-chief of the Greek army, Special Forces Intelligence, very distinguished man, given special honors by the King of Greece. And so when I visit Greece and I see all of that, and you cannot escape war. When you're in a place like that, you just cannot escape it. And it's something that people fear, and also have respect that this can happen at any moment. We have more sense of level of peace here than we've ever had, I think, in Halifax. But during the First World War and the Second World War, Halifax saw great burdens on it as the Warden of the North. And the greatest, devastation out of that was the Halifax explosion during 1917. And I think out of any city in North America, Halifax is really served as a city more than any other, with its harbor and being the lifeline to supplies to Europe during World War II, and seeing the troops and Canadians leave. This is where you depart from, right? And there was training facilities for soldiers there in Ganesh that would then come down here. We have the 1st Construction Battalion, the Old Black Battalion, and it's always been a place, the Atlantic province has always been a place where there's been a higher level of service for armed forces than other parts of Canada.
And I think, is it true that in terms of where the Canadian military is stationed in Canada, Halifax houses a large number of Navy personnel? Is that right?
Navy and armed forces, and now going into NATO, to deal with NATO. So this continues to be a place of armed forces, and as they say, the military town. And it has been since its founding in 1749 for that purpose. And the dockyard is one of the oldest in North America, and if not, and definitely the oldest in Canada. And so, for me, I think looking back at all of this, it's not something to glorify war. It's something to respect and try your best to avoid at all costs. And having Remembrance Day and thinking back to those times and places is all important to make sure we say, do we really want to go through that again? The answer is absolutely no. And that is why Remembrance Day is so important. The freedom, the sacrifices, just sense of bringing some purpose and meaning to something that seemed at the times completely out of control.
Right. And it's relatively easier to commemorate a day like this when you have individuals who knew loved ones who died or fought in a war. But what I really like to see is, with all the poppies and around town, and having conversations with young people. I know my son is 14 years old, and he's lived in a world, thank goodness for him, where war has not been in his face. But still, with a day like this today, he can hear the stories and understand the price that the people paid generations and generations ago. So that keeps this alive, as you said.
And, for anyone listening out there, my great-grandparents especially lived through World War II, and like my grandmother would say, the SS Gestapo colonels, came to visit, broke down the door, held guns to their head, and demanded that they sew the buttons onto the colonel's shirt, and make sure that my great-grandfather her dad was a chief mechanic, and he was in Athens, and they dragged him off to fix all their machinery at gunpoint. It wasn't he didn't want to, but
right.
It was an ultimatum: either you do it or that's it,
or else. Here's hoping that we don't live through times like that again. What's happening in Halifax on Monday, and how are you going to be commemorating the the morning, the day?
There's going to be many ceremonies throughout the city, which is very much my point of coming here and, telling people, please attend the ceremonies. It's crucial you do so. I myself will be attending the one here at Grand Parade and, taking part in that and making sure that, we remember. And I think the best statement is lest we forget, right?
That's right. So there's a ceremony at Grand Parade. I understand there are events at Citadel Hill as well.
Yes, they usually have a gun salute there traditionally. So last year was a little different with situations that were going on. They had moved that over to Dartmouth, but now I'm confident that they're coming back to Grand Parade with the cenotaph there. And actually, the cenotaph in downtown Halifax was very interesting how it got there, because there used to be a fountain there in its place before it was installed.
Okay.
And there was great debate among citizens. They really liked the fountain, and they didn't want the cenotaph to go there and replace the fountain. But then they said, no, it has to go. So they replaced the fountain with the current cenotaph.
I see.
And the other part of that also is then after World War II, we have the Halifax Memorial Library, which in itself is a living cenotaph, the whole building. And
quite a nice statue of Winston Churchill out front.
And that's all about motion at ground level. Churchill feeling more stressed, walking about, pacing, wondering what's going to happen.
What's going to happen to that building? It's since I've moved here, it's been closed and there's discussions. Do you? But
prior to the election, they had ruled that it would be a $300,000 study done, saying to demolish it, which on Remembrance Day I can happily say do not allow that to happen.
Yeah, hopefully that's not going to happen. I heard an interesting fact about the Grand Parade, where originally Dalhousie University owned that space, and when the city government wanted to take it over, part of the negotiation was Dalhousie moved out of the space into where their university is now, but they retained the right for a Dalhousie student to ride their horse in the Grand Parade, and apparently that's still on the books. So
these things are still on the books.
Dalhousie students on horse might be able to negotiate that today.
Well, that might be on a Saturday night. They might do that.
Right. Yes. Well. So there'll be events probably throughout every community, whether it's over in Dartmouth or Sackville or Spryfield or Bedford, right?
Everywhere throughout the HRM in Nova Scotia, and please go out and be a part of it, and take a moment of reflection, not just of the past sacrifices, but what you can also do yourself for your community, and be involved and engaged. And when you build stronger community, then you also build a better chance for peace in the world, right?
Hear. Agreed. Well, William, thank you for this short discussion, and hope you have a good weekend and a good Remembrance Day.
And let's not forget, lest we forget.
Yes, agreed.